For 12 long years, Thaddeus Crow hadn't opened his door to a single soul. His world had shrunk to the size of his land, 60 acres of brittle grass and broken fence lines, where the wind never stopped groaning and silence was his only companion. He spoke to his livestock more than he spoke to himself, and even then, only when necessary. The house, wooden, fortified, unyielding, was a fortress of habit, grief, and hard-earned solitude. He'd reinforced every window with steel latches, installed 3 iron bolts on the front door, and buried his past beneath layers of routine and rust. The townsfolk whispered about him, called him the ghost farmer, said he was either mad or dangerous. Thaddeus didn't care. He'd paid a price no man should bear, and isolation was the only peace he'd found that didn't ask for more blood. So when the knock came, 3 times, sharp and urgent, he thought at first it must have been the storm playing tricks. But then came a voice muffled by rain and wood. "Please, sir, just until morning." Thaddeus froze mid-step, his hand already reaching for the rifle he kept by the door. Another voice followed, younger, trembling. "We have nowhere else to go." He moved to the window, careful not to make noise, and peered through a crack in the boarded shutter. What he saw set off every alarm his instincts had buried. 6 women huddled beneath the awning, rain soaking through their torn dresses, mud clinging to their skirts like leeches, their faces pale with exhaustion, fear, and something else, desperation. The woman in front stood tall, dark-haired, her eyes too calm for someone begging. Behind her, a girl barely out of childhood held her swollen belly with both hands. Pregnant. Thaddeus's chest tightened, and he hated that it did. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just let the silence hang while the storm howled behind them. "Road's that way," he finally growled through the door, his voice rough from disuse. "Town's 15 miles south." The older woman answered this time, voice steady, spine unbending even in the downpour. "The bridge is washed out. We tried. Wagon stuck. The river's rising." Thaddeus glanced down and saw the young one clutch her belly, then double over with a small, strangled cry. Lightning flashed, brief, violent, and in that instant he saw the fear in all their faces shift into something primal. Not fear of him. Fear of what was out there. Wolves, maybe. Worse than wolves, most likely. His grip tightened on the rifle, but the part of him he'd spent years trying to kill, compassion, decency, damn foolish instinct, began to stir. He didn't care about the women, didn't care about their story, but a birth in a storm meant blood, screaming, attention. That wasn't good for anyone, not them, not him. With a curse under his breath, he slid back the first bolt, then the second, then the third. The door creaked open a crack, revealing his weathered face and eyes, hard with suspicion. "One night," he said, stepping aside just enough. "When the storm breaks, you leave." And just like that, 6 women stepped out of the night and into the hollowed-out heart of a man who thought he'd already seen the worst the world had to offer. The women entered like a flood, silent at first, cautious, eyes flicking across the room like prey, unsure of a predator. Mud slid from their boots and soaked into Thaddeus's clean floors. He hated that, hated more how quickly they made themselves fit. The dark-haired one, clearly the leader, moved fast, guiding the pregnant girl, Clementine they called her, to the chair nearest the hearth. Her hands were cold but steady as she unwrapped wet cloaks, revealing arms scratched from brush, skin bruised and raw from travel. The older woman, gray-haired and hawk-eyed, began checking Clementine's belly with the practiced precision of someone who'd done this before. "She needs heat and water. Blankets," she muttered. The other 3, similar in cheekbones, hair shades, and quiet glances, huddled near the back wall. Sisters, likely. Their eyes scanned exits, hands twitching near hidden weapons, breathing synchronized like soldiers waiting for orders. Thaddeus watched from the corner, still clutching his rifle. They spread through his home like smoke, like memory, finding cracks in places he thought sealed. And he knew, this wasn't just bad weather. This was trouble wrapped in petticoats and panic. "You're not just travelers," he said finally, voice low and dry as splintered wood. The leader, Magnolia, she'd told the older woman to call her, didn't blink. Her eyes locked on his with something between warning and weariness. "Aren't we all running from something, Mr. Crow?" The words were smooth, even polite, but the way she said his name, it landed like a hook. Magnolia smiled, a slow thing that didn't touch her eyes. "We're grateful for your hospitality." "Didn't offer any," Thaddeus muttered. But he'd seen too much in his time to miss the signs, the unnatural calm in a crisis, the subtle guarding of their bags, the way one sister kept glancing at the windows every 10 seconds, always the same pattern. This wasn't desperation. It was survival. It had shape, purpose, history. These women weren't hiding from the weather. They were hiding from someone who knew how to chase. The truth didn't come in a flood, but in fragments, pried loose by necessity and fear. Clementine let out a sudden gasp, sharp and urgent. "They're getting stronger," she said, clutching her belly as a contraction rippled through her frame. Magnolia knelt beside her, brushing sweat-damp hair from the girl's forehead, and for a moment the mask slipped. Thaddeus saw real fear there, not the kind you show to manipulate, the kind that comes from remembering something terrible. The gray-haired woman, Birdie, looked up at him. "We witnessed something," she said simply. "Something we weren't supposed to see." "What kind of something?" Thaddeus asked, though his gut already knew. "A murder." It landed like cold steel against bone. 3 nights ago, Silver Creek, a man named Carson Vale, big name, rich, owns judges, sheriffs. He killed a family, parents, 2 children, over land, shot them like dogs. Thaddeus's throat tightened. That name, he knew it. Everyone in these parts did. And suddenly everything made sense. The tension, the posture, the weapons, the constant looking over their shoulders. These weren't just lost women. They were witnesses, marked for death. And now they'd brought their storm into his home. The storm outside screamed louder than any woman could, but Clementine was getting close. Her hands clutched the arms of the chair like a drowning soul grabbing driftwood, knuckles white, breath shallow and fast. Birdie had her hands on the girl's belly again, murmuring things only women who'd birthed too many babies in too little comfort knew how to say. Magnolia stood close behind, pressing a wet cloth to Clementine's forehead, her strong frame tense with worry. Then came the sound that froze every breath in the cabin, a long, low howl, too close to be ignored. Wolves, more than one. Thaddeus stepped toward the door, rifle up, heart clenching. Those beasts had been coming down from the hills more often, driven by hunger and the scent of easy prey. "You hear that?" Magnolia said, her voice quiet but clipped. "Those aren't dogs." She was right. Thaddeus moved to the window and spotted movement in the shadows, quick, low to the ground, circling. His mouth went dry. This wasn't just a birth in a storm. It was a birth under siege. "I need hot water, blankets, clean rags." "Now," Birdie barked like a field nurse, not asking permission. Magnolia was already moving toward the stove. Thaddeus stepped forward, ready to protest, but the older woman cut him off with a glare that could have splintered stone. "Unless you want a dead girl and a dead baby, don't stand there flapping your lips. Help us." The words hit him harder than they should have. Something in his chest stirred, low and sick and very old. He hadn't touched another human being in years, hadn't let anyone speak to him like that. And yet, without thinking, he moved, filled the kettle, pulled clean cloth from a drawer. His hands knew what to do even before his mind caught up. Magnolia noticed. "You know about birth," she said softly, watching him work. "I can see it in your face." He didn't answer. Couldn't. Because the truth was, he did know. Too much. He'd helped once, long ago. He'd tried to bring life into a world that wasn't ready to keep it, and he'd buried the result. Since then, he hadn't touched another cradle. Not once. Then, just as he set the pot on the stove, he saw it, tracks in the mud, right outside the window. Not wolf prints, boot prints. Heavy, fresh, too big to belong to any of the women. His blood turned cold. Someone had been watching the cabin. Someone had followed them here. He slid to the wall, keeping low, and motioned Magnolia over. She came silently, eyes sharp. "Company," he whispered. "At least 2 sets of prints." Her face blanched. The controls she wore, like armor, cracked for the first time. "How many?" "Can't tell yet." Then Clementine screamed again, high and raw. Birdie shouted, "We need to get her lying down. Now!" Thaddeus hesitated. That scream had carried. Wolves weren't the only things that hunted by sound. He looked at Magnolia. "Now you're going to tell me what the hell you brought to my doorstep." She hesitated only a second before answering, because whatever was outside that door was worse than the judgment waiting in his eyes. The first shot shattered the silence like a hammer through glass. It wasn't aimed at the cabin, just a warning, a declaration. Then came the voice, smooth as polished bone and twice as cold. "We know you're in there, ladies. Come out peaceful, and maybe we'll make it quick." Magnolia stiffened. Della cursed under her breath and reached for the small pistol hidden in her boot. Thaddeus peeked through the front window and saw muzzle flashes in the rain, low to the ground, flanking positions. Whoever these men were, they weren't drunk cowhands or bandits. Their movements were clean, strategic, military. He'd seen that kind of formation before, years ago, in places no one likes to name. "They've surrounded us," he said. "Testing range, checking blind spots." Magnolia swallowed hard. "It's him," she whispered. "Carson Vale." The name hung in the room like poison. Even Birdie's hands faltered for half a second. Clementine moaned behind them, lost in labor. "We don't have time for a siege," Ivy hissed, "not with her about to give birth." Thaddeus adjusted his grip on the shotgun. The enemy was here, and they weren't here for money. They'd come to reclaim what they believed was theirs. "We weren't just passing through," Magnolia said suddenly, her voice lower now, no longer hiding. "We were part of it." "Part of what?" Thaddeus asked, though part of him already knew. "Vale owns a brothel in Silver Creek," she said, each word heavier than the last. "We weren't guests. We were inventory." She glanced at the other women, their eyes wide but not surprised. They'd all lived it. 3 nights ago, he made us stand there, made us watch as he murdered a man, his wife, and their 2 children over a land dispute. He said it was a lesson, said we were to spread the story, so people knew what happens to anyone who crosses him. Thaddeus felt bile rise in his throat. "You were supposed to be witnesses." "Messengers," Birdie added quietly, not meeting anyone's eyes. "Unspoken threats wrapped in pretty faces." "But we couldn't," Ivy said. "When we saw those kids, we just couldn't." "So you ran," Thaddeus muttered. Magnolia nodded. "And now Vale's coming to make an example out of us." Outside, another shot rang out, closer this time. The air thickened with smoke and dread. This wasn't just a birth or a storm. This was judgment. And they were all trapped inside a cabin with sins piling high around them, like dry kindling. As the women scrambled to reinforce the cabin and Clementine screamed in the back room, Birdie's hands trembled. She held a strip of cloth soaked in warm water to the girl's forehead, but her eyes darted toward the window. Something had shifted in her. Thaddeus noticed it before the others. The hesitation, the dread, the weight of something unspoken pressing behind her ribs. Then came the voice, soft, tired, and brutal. "There's something else," Bertie said, barely above a whisper. Magnolia spun around, fury already flaring in her eyes. "Bertie, don't." "He deserves to know," Bertie said. "They all do." She looked at Thaddeus, then each woman in turn. "One of us isn't who she claims to be." The room stiffened, the fire crackled like it was listening. "One of us has been working for Carson Vale all along." Silence crashed like thunder. Magnolia stepped back from Bertie as if she'd been burned. Ivy gasped. Della's hand went to her pistol. "Who?" Thaddeus asked, his voice steady but his knuckles white. Bertie didn't answer. She didn't have to. The look in her eyes said everything. It was her. "I worked for him," Bertie confessed, her voice shaking with shame. 15 years. I was his eyes, his ears. I reported on the girls who tried to run, who talked too much, who showed signs of hope. Della looked like she might strike her. Magnolia's jaw clenched so tight it creaked. "Why?" Ivy whispered, her voice wounded more than angry. "Money," Bertie said flatly. "My husband was dying. My daughter owed debts I couldn't pay. I did what I had to." "You sold us," Magnolia snapped. "You watched us break, and you just kept sending him letters." "Until now," Bertie said, her voice hardening just a little. She looked down at Clementine, whose body writhed in agony. "I saw this girl, saw that baby inside her, and I remembered what it felt like to be innocent, what it felt like to believe you were worth saving." She held the girl's hand like it was an anchor. "I can't undo what I've done, but I can choose who I am now." Thunder boomed, but the cabin was quieter than death. Thaddeus didn't speak. He stood by the window, watching raindrops streak down the glass like tears from the sky. But inside, something cracked open. Because what Bertie said, it wasn't just hers. It was his, too. The sins, the silence, the years spent hiding from a world he helped ruin. He thought of Sarah, his wife, the fire, the cries he hadn't been able to silence. He thought of that final order at Millfield when he chose the mission over the lives of innocents, and how the guilt had built walls around him stronger than any cabin could hold. Now here was Bertie, a broken soul offering her last scrap of dignity in a house full of secrets and smoke. He didn't forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But he understood her. And sometimes that was worse. He looked around at the women, tired, bloodied, betrayed, and knew none of them were innocent anymore. But all of them deserved a choice. And choices were about to become very, very scarce. The front wall exploded in a shower of splinters and flame, a gaping wound torn into the heart of the cabin. And through it stepped a figure like something summoned from the pit. Tall, lean, pristine in a charcoal gray coat, untouched by smoke or rain. Carson Vale. His silver hair was combed back immaculately. His boots shone beneath a layer of soot. His eyes, calm, calculating, and cruel, scanned the room like he was assessing livestock at auction. "Ladies," he said, as if greeting old friends at a dinner party, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." 3 armed men followed behind him, rifles raised, eyes blank with violence. Smoke curled around their feet as flames licked the beams above. But Vale looked unbothered, even bored. Then his gaze settled on Thaddeus. A thin smile crept across his face. "Well now, Captain Thaddeus Crow. Or do you go by another name these days?" The words struck like a hammer. Magnolia turned to Thaddeus, startled. "You know him?" "Oh yes," Vale said, stepping deeper into the firelight. "We crossed paths once, a long time ago, back when we both still believed in causes and uniforms, before Millfield. That name, Millfield, detonated inside Thaddeus like shrapnel. His fingers curled tighter around the shotgun. Magnolia whispered, "What happened at Millfield?" Vale chuckled. "He won't tell you, but I will." He circled like a snake, slow and deliberate. The mission was simple: extract information, burn the camp, leave no survivors. But your man here found civilians, a woman, a child. He hesitated. For 5 minutes. And in those 5 minutes, 2 squads died, including mine. His voice sharpened. He chose them over us, over the mission. And then he ran. Thaddeus's voice was low, graveled. I stayed to bury them. All of them. Vale leaned closer, his smile thinning. Your wife burned for your conscience, Captain. And now you want to protect these women? Do you ever learn? The flames cracked like laughter overhead. The women stood frozen, eyes darting between the 2 men, soldiers of another life, ghosts of another war. Thaddeus didn't move. He stared straight through Vale like he was remembering every inch of the past he'd tried to bury under silence and dust. How do you know about Millfield? He asked. That operation was scrubbed from every record. Because I was there, Vale said, and for the first time his voice held something human, bitterness. Not officially, of course. I was part of the detail sent to clean up after your hesitation. We weren't supposed to exist. We were names written in pencil on burnt orders. Magnolia stared at both men. You were soldiers together? Not quite, Vale replied. We were on opposite ends of the same battlefield. He still had orders. I already knew what war really was. He looked around at the women. And now he's playing hero. Again. They're not yours, Thaddeus said. They're people, not property. Property, Vale said, tasting the word like wine. They made themselves that the moment they signed my contracts. Everything else is sentiment. And sentiment, Captain, is what got your family killed. That was it. The final spark. The last nail in the coffin of mercy. Because now it wasn't just war. It was personal. Gunfire erupted before anyone could speak. Wood splintered, glass shattered, and the cabin filled with smoke, screams, and the sharp metallic sting of war. Thaddeus shoved Magnolia to the ground behind the overturned table as bullets tore through the air above their heads. Della! Ivy! Now! He barked. The sisters moved with terrifying purpose. Della, despite the blood pooling from her shoulder, dropped one of Vale's men with a shot to the chest. Ivy flanked left, every bullet she fired aimed to kill. Thaddeus took the front window, shotgun raised, heart steady. Another enemy appeared in the smoke. Thaddeus didn't hesitate. One blast, center mass. The man flew backward, dead before he hit the floor. 2 down, he muttered. But there was no time to count. Flames crackled along the back wall. Vale's men had poured accelerant. Fire now licked the rafters like hungry tongues, and smoke curled down from the ceiling, choking the room. And amid it all, Clementine screamed. Her voice pierced the chaos, raw and primal. Birdie knelt between her legs, hands slick with blood and birth. She's crowning! We can't move her, Magnolia cried, trying to shield them from the ash falling like snow. Then, through gunfire and heat and terror, came a sound that froze the world. A baby's cry. Sharp, clean, defiant. Birdie held up the newborn, tears streaming down her face. It's a girl, she whispered. A child born in the middle of a war zone. Proof that something pure could still exist in a world so soaked in blood. But the fire wasn't done. The flames roared louder, eating through timber and roof like a beast unchained. Smoke pushed them low to the ground. We have to move, Thaddeus shouted, coughing, eyes stinging. Back wall, now! He kicked through the boards with his boot, splinters flying, and cool air rushed in like salvation. Outside, the rain had softened, but not enough to put out the inferno. One by one, they passed through the hole, Della clinging to Ivy, Magnolia carrying the rifle Thaddeus gave her, Birdie cradling the newborn in blood-soaked cloth. Thaddeus grabbed Clementine last, hoisting her limp body over his shoulder. She was conscious, barely, still clutching the child with everything she had. They spilled into the mud behind the cabin, just as the structure groaned, twisted, and began to collapse in on itself. Behind them, Vale's empire of terror was reduced to flame, smoke, and ruin. But Thaddeus knew better than to celebrate. The fire had taken the cabin, but not the storm to come. The rain had softened to a drizzle, hissing against the dying embers of the cabin, now reduced to blackened timber and rising steam. The women huddled near the tree line, soaked, shivering, bruised, but alive. Della sat slumped against a rock, her shoulder drenched in blood, face pale as ash. Ivy knelt beside her, pressing cloth to the wound, whispering words only sisters understand. "She's losing too much," Ivy said, choking back panic. "She'll make it," Thaddeus answered, dropping to one knee and tearing a strip from what was once his coat. His hands moved fast, practiced, clamping the artery, tying the bandage, sealing the wound with fire and instinct. Della screamed once, then passed out. Her pulse was faint, but there. "She needs a doctor," Magnolia said. "A real one." "Then we keep moving," Thaddeus said, rising, his voice hoarse but certain. "Now." Clementine sat cradling the child, her body trembling from the trauma of labor and fire and survival. But her eyes never left the tiny face pressed to her chest. "She's strong," she whispered. "Didn't even cry at the smoke." Thaddeus stood nearby, rifle still in hand, but his gaze was elsewhere, lost in the flickering memory of another child who'd never had the chance to cry. Clementine looked up at him, her voice small. "What was her name?" He didn't answer at first, then quietly, "Sarah." Clementine nodded. "Then that's what I'll call her, if that's all right." Thaddeus swallowed hard. 1,000 images flooded his mind, firelight on a cradle, the scent of lavender soap, a tiny hand curling around his finger. He gave the smallest nod. "It's more than all right." In that moment, under a pale morning sky, something in him cracked wide open, and what came through was not grief, but grace. They walked for miles before the sun broke fully across the horizon. The women were exhausted, bloodied, quiet, but their silence was different now, not fear, but resolve. At the crossroads where the broken signpost pointed west, Magnolia paused. "We've got some money saved," she said. "Not much, but enough to start again. California, maybe. Somewhere Vale's name doesn't echo." She looked at Thaddeus. "You could come with us." Ivy and Nora turned to listen. Even Birdie, still cradling baby Sarah, tilted her head in quiet hope. Thaddeus stared down the western path, then back toward the smoking ruin of what had been his fortress. "I can't," he said simply. "Not yet." "Why?" Magnolia asked. "Because Vale had partners," he answered. "Judges, lawmen, men who believe people are property, and someone needs to teach them otherwise." He looked at her, and for the first time he smiled. "This time I won't hesitate." Magnolia didn't smile back, not right away, but her eyes softened. "The union's unofficial operations. Sounds like they might be back in business." "Something like that," he said. 6 months later, a letter arrived, creased, worn, scented faintly with dried flowers. It was postmarked from Sacramento and written in careful, looping script. "Sarah took her first steps yesterday," it read. "Birdie says she'll be a fighter. Della's healed mostly. Ivy's opening a small bakery. Nora's teaching kids how to read. We don't speak about Vale much anymore, but we remember. We remember because you reminded us. Some battles are worth winning. Thank you for standing with us when we had nowhere left to run." It was signed simply. Monsieur Thaddeus folded the letter and stared out toward the ridge where sunlight crept over the land. In the distance, he could see a new cabin going up. His own hands, his own hammer, his second chance. And beside it, on the porch beam, he'd carved a name into the wood. Sarah. Forgiveness, he'd come to understand, wasn't something you earned in full. It was something you chose, moment by moment, breath by breath, until you could finally stand tall again in the daylight.